There was quite a fight on GB News between Ben Habib, who is of the Reform Party, but he's been demoted by Nigel Farage in recent times, but he's still loyal to Reform, but he doesn't agree with everything because he thinks they should be fighting for a more Brexit than the Brexit we've got. Anyway, Ben had a fight with Jonathan Lis, who is obviously a more sensible left of centre commentator, journalist. And they were asked about whether Keir Starmer should have a common sense minister, as the last government did. It started on that, and it culminated in really a row about Brexit and British, and that if you are pro-EU, Ben Habib thinks that you are anti-British. But if you were pro-EU in 2016, you had an excuse because we'd been 40 years in the EU. But now, in 2024, if you're pro-EU, Ben Habib basically thinks that you're anti-British. Ben thinks that we're not controlling our borders enough. He doesn't respect the fact that since Brexit, we've lost control of our borders. But he thinks in doing Brexit more, we will have more control, even though he can't explain how that is the case, apart from going on about being British all of the time. It is quite extraordinary.
To have a common sense minister is to admit that there isn't common sense in government, and I think it was an own goal of the Conservatives to invite Esther to fill that role. But, of course, looking at the way the country's being governed, one could legitimately make the case there is a complete absence of common sense in government.
Jonathan?
No, common sense, the whole post of common sense minister was designed to perpetuate a culture war by the Conservative government where they were trying to package their quite sort of hard right ideas as common sense, and I'm glad that Labour hasn't continued it.
God, I was just about to respond to the culture wars and hard rights, and do you know what? I can't be bothered. It's Friday. I'll move on. Gareth, you never told me whether or not you think Keir Starmer needs a common sense minister. Get in touch and tell me your answer to your own question. Look, I can tell you now, Lee Anderson, he's been speaking out. He says, using words like political tsunami, he says the path to success in 2029 is now on track. What's he talking about? Well, he's talking about the fact that Reform UK, they gained a council seat in Blackpool, actually, from Labour last night. They got 38.8% of the vote. Reform have tweeted out saying that they are the real opposition. Are they, Ben Habib?
Absolutely. Ideologically, there is no doubt that the Conservative Party is not the opposition, it is Reform, because the Conservative Party, contrary to what Jonathan just said, is not far right. Nor is
far right. He didn't say far right, he said hard right.
Sorry, what did you say?
I said hard right.
Hard right, sorry.
Hard right culture warriors.
Hard right. The Conservative Party are not hard right. And the culture wars should never be dismissed, by the way. I will just come back to your question. But before just to say the culture wars should not be dismissed. Having a settled culture is part of the community, part of society, part of, indeed, of being the nation state that is the United Kingdom. And I think we dismiss the importance of culture at our great cost. But Reform gets it. Reform understands that you need a joined-up agenda between the economy, between the Constitution, our democratic institutions, and our culture to bring together the country to a position where it can be governed with its interests at heart and with the prosperity of the British people in mind, unlike the form of governance delivered both by the Conservative Party and by the Labour Party on steroids of doing things as they see what they see as being in the global good, governing through international law, international institutions, domestic quangos, which are completely unaccountable. What the Conservatives and the Labour Party together in government have done is dumb down our democracy, turn their back on the British people, and adopt this kind of what I would regard as extreme form of liberalism, where you can't even identify, where the Prime Minister of this country can't even identify what a woman is accurately. We are governed by idiots. And that's why I say probably in the case of the Labour Party, we do need a Minister of Common Sense.
Jonathan's pulling some faces. The wind doesn't change. What's the matter? What's he saying that's wrong?
I can't really be bothered to engage with with everything that Ben has just said.
Well, this is going to be an interesting show, isn't it, everyone?
Ben has given a kind of a reform-style stump speech as though it's still the election campaign. Everything that Ben has just said.
Well, this is going to be an interesting show, isn't it, everyone?
Ben has given a kind of a reform-style stump speech as though it's still the election campaign. We've moved on from the election. Look, no one is doubting that reform poses a big threat. I would argue that reform poses that threat to the Conservative Party more than the Labour Party, but obviously the Labour Party is not immune from that threat. What you find in local election, by-elections in particular, is very strange results all over the board. You see that often. There are specific local circumstances, there are individual candidates who have strong local appeal and whatever. I think if reform thinks that this means it's going to be forming the next government, they might have another thing coming. But that doesn't mean that we should ignore the threat from reform. But I would argue that the Conservatives have a lot more to fear than Labour has.
I think the Conservatives have already experienced the damage reform will do. And to some extent, the Labour Party is what was slightly protected during the general election from reform because Keir Starmer held so many of his cards to his chest. We didn't really see what the Labour Party was. The electorate didn't see how damaging the Labour Party would be. The electorate absolutely get that now. Reform came second in 98 seats. And this was a safe Blackpool council seat that Reform took off the Labour Party today. And Reform will be taking many more seats. A year ago, just on the point on by-elections, a year ago people used to say, oh, well, Reform's not performing at by-elections. If it can't do well at by-elections, it hasn't got a hope in the general election. Now we've got 5 seats in Parliament. People say it's only 5 seats, but it's a bridgehead, and we're winning by-election seats, and we're going to have a thumping set of results in the local elections next May. And it'll be Labour and the Tories who'll be giving up their seats to Reform.
Ben, do you seriously think that Reform is going to be either forming the next government or the next opposition? Seriously?
I think that Reform has it within its grasp to absolutely form the next government. There are many challenges it faces, some from within the party, which I've talked about on this show and other channels, and some without. And of course, a week is a long time in politics. But Reform is the only party in Parliament, the only political party that is known across this country that actually has a coherent pro-British set of policies. The Labour Party is not pro-British. I say Keir Starmer is anti-British.
This is
his preparedness.
This is completely typical of you.
It is
and completely outrageous every time you say it. Someone who disagrees with you, Ben, does not make them anti-British. It just means that they disagree with you. It's completely. You have no monopoly over what it means to be British or pro-British. I find it profoundly offensive that you seek to define patriotism in your own image alone. That is actually, ironically enough, anti-British in itself.
Well, let me just tell you. Our Prime Minister wishes this country to be governed from Brussels. He's prepared to take...
He's not even trying to get us back in the single market, for goodness sake.
He was caught off camera when he thought he was off camera in Montreal in September 2023 saying, if I'm elected Prime Minister, I will align us completely with the European Union.
Do you think that he would take us back into the European Union without the say-so of the British people? Do you really think that? Of course he would.
If the Prime Minister got half a chance to do it, he would do it. And there are multiple mechanisms by which he could abuse the democratic process.
Then you are one step away from calling the British people anti-British. If the British people want to be in the European Union, then we should be in the European Union. If they don't, then we shouldn't be. And if enough people say they want a referendum, then we can have a referendum. No one is arguing that right now.
Jonathan, if you have an individual in office who wishes to give up the democratic representation of the people in this country to a third power, can I just finish? And take down their borders, as he is flirting with already with this youth scheme, and would voluntarily,
we have with loads of other countries like Australia.
We have a visa system with Australia and Canada. The proposal with the European Union is for people up to the age of 30 to be able to come and go as they please. That is freedom of movement. That is taking down your borders to a foreign power.
It would not be freedom of movement. It would be exactly the same model that we have with 12 other countries.
I don't need to go. I can go much further with why I think he's anti-British, but those 2 steps alone, in my view, constitute an attack on the nation-state that is the United Kingdom.
I think it is really sad that we have to smear our opponents in this
I'm not
way.
smearing our
As I said
opponents.
to you on this programme, famously enough, a couple of weeks ago, being British you can have many, many different views, and we can still be pro-British. We can still be patriotic. We just have a different vision of what it means, what we want for this country. That's all it is. It's having a different vision. I would never slander my opponents as being anti-British. I vehemently disagree with their vision for this country. It does not make them anti-British. It just means that we disagree.
Hold on, because I've heard you. You might not slander your words, your opposition as being anti-British or whatever, but I've heard you call your political opponents far right, hard right, all those kind of things. I would say that is a form of smearing.
Well, if someone is far right, then I'll say they're far right. I haven't called anyone in this room far right. I haven't called the Conservatives far right. Hard right is just, I think it's just an accurate description of what some people are, in the way that people talk about hard left, soft left, far left. These are just descriptions. If you take them as a smear, that's in itself quite interesting, because it makes you wonder, what do you think being right-wing is?
You say hard right or far right in order to discredit. Let's just be honest about the debate. You use the language to be on the extreme end of a spectrum is by definition almost wrong.
Ben,
that's why you say it.
Ben, do you think that David Cameron has the same politics as Suella Braverman? They are both right-wing, but obviously one of them is further right.
David Cameron is not right-wing. David Cameron is not right-wing. And the debate, the schism in British politics at the moment is not between the left and the right. The schism is between those that would govern us through unaccountable domestic institutions, otherwise known as quangos, and international institutions like the European Union, WHO, the UN, etc., embed in place international law, which we're repeatedly told trumps domestic law and trumps domestic interests, and is prepared repeatedly to give away power from the people of this country to these institutions. And if you stand, as I believe many in the Conservative Party do, and certainly the Labour Party and Liberal Democrats, against the nation-state of the United Kingdom, you are anti-British. It's a matter of fact. You can shake your head, but if you have policies that undermine and reduce the nation state, then you are anti-British, and we need to say it.
Impression of what it is. There are people. Do you really not accept? There are people who wanted to be in the European Union who actually believed in Britain, who wanted Britain to succeed. They just had a different idea of it. Are you really so blinkered that you think that anyone who was a Remainer was anti-British? Is that really what you're saying?
I didn't say that. I think as a Remainer in 2016. You were legitimately able to hold that view because for 40 years we'd been part of this organisation. We have now left this organisation and we know precisely what it means to join the institution. And what that means is giving up power from Westminster, taking down our borders, and actually, if we were to join it, we'd have to give up our currency. We'd have to give up our.
It's a completely confused argument.
No, it's not confused.
No, you're saying that a Remainer wasn't anti-British in 2016, but is anti-British now.
We were part of the European Union at that point in time.
Right.
We are now enlightened, and we also know, Jonathan, that unlike in 2016, if we join now, we will be giving up control of our monetary policy. And I regard that as fundamentally anti-British. Giving it up to Brussels, to the ECB.
Well, so you're preempting the terms of negotiation?
No, there is no negotiation.
There's no negotiation. No one wants to.
Jonathan,
no one wants to join the
EU. You need to read up on it. If you want to join the EU, you have to join the euro. It's a matter of fact. There's no negotiation.
If we ever get to the stage of negotiating, there will be a negotiation.
Are you a rejoiner?
By definition.
Jonathan, are you a rejoiner?
It's not on the table right now.
But are you a rejoiner?
Obviously, I think that it's in Britain's long-term interest, on principle, to be part of the European Union.
Why? To take down our borders, to give up governance to Brussels, to give up our currency.
Right.
The Reform Party are just furthering their culture war and campaigning in the hope of picking up more council seats and preparing to try and win more parliamentary seats going forward in 2029. It will be interesting to see if they plateau and stay at the same rate, which is about the same as what UKIP achieved, or whether they do make progress going forward.